So you're about to start mixing a track and you notice that it sounds well, but not so great. Maybe it was recorded in a less than ideal environment, or the sounds that you're using sounds like this. Whatever the reason you're faced with, yes, equalizers are powerful tools that can fix almost everything, but before you even start, you need to ask yourself one question. Is this track even worth fixing? I mean, instead of trying to polish a turd, give your track an honest approach. So the first mistake that almost everyone makes is trying to fix a sound that cannot be fixed. You might think that cutting all the frequencies that sound bad will make it sound better, but in reality, you will end up losing all the flavor, character, and depth of your track, and your EQ looks like a nightmare. Bruh. But there are a few things you can try, so let's get straight into the point. For example, people usually create a bell curve and start looking for any resonant tones, and they boost over 10 dB searching for frequencies to cut, which is wrong because everything resonates, as you can hear. And you just trick yourself into thinking that you gotta cut everything because everything resonates. So you end up cutting too much, or parts that don't need to be cut. You start creating problems that doesn't exist. So don't do that. When you're looking for frequencies to cut or to boost, go for 5, 7 dB. That is enough for you to spot the true areas. A cool trick is to close your eyes, just listen to the track, go with intention while you're sweeping. This way you don't get visually confused and will help you make more accurate adjustments and avoid over EQing the track. And if your track cannot be fixed and you got a lot of harsh frequencies everywhere, stop thinking that EQ is gonna solve everything. Sample replacement is a better option. Just give up on that clap or vocal, record it again, replace it with something better instead of spending 2 hours in a surgery trying to fix a sound that cannot be fixed and just to end up losing all the frequencies. Your EQ looks like this and you just make it sound unnatural, you know? Now, let's move on to mistake number 2, which is not using EQ in context. This is probably the biggest mistake I could mention here. Now, I know what you're thinking, but EQing each instrument solo sounds like a logical thing to do, right? Well, it's not. Let me explain why, because this can give you a false impression of how it would sound in final mix. It might sound amazing on its own, but as soon as you bring it back into the mix, it might clash with other instruments or lack presence. For example, let's begin by listening to this track in solo, turning off all the other instruments. Okay. And normally your brain would think that if you only listen to this track, you will be more focused on how it sounds, what you should improve, and you will hear better, right? Right, that's the thing, completely wrong, because your focus will go too much into this one track and you start hearing more problems, or even worse, you are going to be the one who creates the problems. So you will start chopping, moving around, boosting too much, because the only thing you are hearing is one instrument, and you didn't realize the more focused you are on a specific thing, the more mistakes you are going to make. So that's why you should never equalize in solo, only in context, because nobody will ever hear it that way, you know? Now let's talk about mistake number 3, which is not using EQ automation. Let me explain this with an example. If we take a look at this track, let's say I want the bass and the vocals to stand out during the drop. So what I do, I spend time equalizing them to fit perfectly with all the other instruments. The bass is clean, the vocals have the right amount of presence, but what about the intro of the song? You see, the same EQ settings that work for the drop may not work for the intro. For example, you might want the vocal to be more present and full during the intro and more tiny and sharp where the bass starts at the drop. And there are 2 ways to go about it. First, you can duplicate the vocal or instrument track and EQ it specifically for the intro. This way you can have different EQ settings for different parts of the song. Or another way is to use EQ automation. This means creating a change in EQ settings at specific points in the song. So for the intro, you can increase the low-mid tonality of the vocal or instrument, and when the drop starts you can go back to the EQ settings you had for the drop, as you can see right here. So next time you're working on a song, remember to not only focus yourself into EQing your tracks in a general way for one specific part, but also consider using EQ automation to create that kind of like variety, that balance in your mix. Now let's move on to mistake number 4, which is not using high pass and low pass on all your tracks. Why? Because many instruments like vocals, pianos, drums, they are all messing in that low frequency range. So you need to cut out any unnecessary low frequencies. And I mean, even your hi-hats have low frequencies sometimes. When it comes to mixing, especially in genres with a lot of bass, it's crucial to think about what's happening in those low frequencies, low mid frequencies. So we want to create enough space for the kick and bass to breathe. Let's take this track for example. If we play this solo on its own, you might think that it's too sharp and overly equalized, but in the context of the mix with all the instruments together, it works perfectly. That's because I've removed everything under 115 Hz to clean up the low end, and if we take off the EQ, you can see that there's a lot of low end information, that it's simply destroying your mix. That's why I recommend applying high pass on pretty much every element. In most cases, the 100-400 Hz range is enough. And now let's move on to the final mistake, which is not using classic EQs. When you're using full parametric EQs like this, you have too much freedom and you end up doing stupid mistakes, creating problems, over EQing the track, seeing all of the spikes everywhere. You know, you have too many options. So try using classic EQs. They have pre-selected frequencies, they have been tried and tested over the years. So let's take, for example, the classic EQ like the API, which has pre-selected frequencies for each band. And the cool part of using classic EQs is that they force us to be more intentional and to actually listen to the track rather than seeing the track. And if you want to release your music worldwide on Spotify, Apple Music, you can try DistroKid. Get 7% off your first membership using the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and see you next time.